with the caveats being there are position battles, especially with the most consequential position on the field. Take them with a grain of salt, but we'll start with the quarterbacks. Who's going to be the top passer this season? And I do think if it's not right out of the gate, maybe in the first 2 or 3 weeks, we see a starter separate himself, and I think it will be Alex Orji. So that'll be my pick.
It's so tough. I'm going to go with Alex Orji too. It just feels like a gut feeling that he is going to start on Saturday. I do think we'll see multiple quarterbacks, and I wouldn't rule out Davis Warren winning the job. I wouldn't rule out at some point Jack Tuttle getting healthy and earning some snaps as well. But I'm going to go with Alex Orji, and he's also going to get his fair share of rushing opportunities as well, and could be a fairly dynamic player.
Let me add a little bit of drama to this question. Who will lead the team in passing yards on Saturday night?
I'll still stick with Alex Orji. I think he's going to start, which would lead me to believe he plays the most unless they get up big, right? And then Davis Warren comes in and plays quite a bit. And again, I don't know what that rotation is going to look like, but we're just envisioning it as we go here. So maybe him. Could it be a dark horse? Like, let's say they are up 35. Could Jaden Denegal rip off a couple big passes and become the leading passer if the other two guys split the significant portion of the game? But I would imagine those two get a lot of game reps because they need that experience. And, so yeah, I would say Orji. Do you agree Saturday night?
I think so.
Okay.
If they're going to do the platoon thing, I wonder, hey, they could run a package with Donovan Edwards in the Wildcat and he pops one over the top for 75, 80 yards. I mean, who's to say?
He's got the best completion percentage in Michigan history.
He does, and he'll let you know it too.
3 for 3.
Speaking of Donovan Edwards, Michigan football's top rusher this season. Pretty much, again, I think we've both sort of agreed that it's going to be a platoon at the position. I think Donovan's your 1A. I think Kalel Mullings is the 1B. You'll have a plethora of other guys mixing in. Most likely Jordan Marshall, Ben Hall most of the time. We'll see if other guys can work their way into that mix, but this feels like Donovan Edwards only because, even if he doesn't have, if he's not able to replicate what we've seen, from a Blake Corum, which I don't expect him to. They're not the same player. They're not going to, they just don't do the same things. He can salvage a game by popping a 75, 80-yard run. So to me, he'll probably have a few of those this year. I think that's going to put him over the top.
I'm going with Donovan Edwards as well, but I also think Kalel Mullings is going to be a beast and a huge part of this offense and what they're going to try to do. His smash mouth ability, running the football is big, and of course he does have some speed himself. And as GT in the chat points out, his completion percentage is pretty good as well. I know it's a sore subject for some people watching, but he also has a completion in his career down in Columbus, I believe. Actually, I know
both he and Donovan are 1 for 1, right?
Against Ohio State. Donovan Edwards 3 for 3 in his career, though. But
that's true. Well, hey, I mean, again, when in doubt, just throw it back to the old days. Run the triple with those guys at quarterback.
And shout out to. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, please don't do that. I spoke something evil into existence.
Shout out to the winged helmet on Twitter. I saw this stat today that Donovan Edwards is the only player in Michigan history with a 75-yard touchdown reception, 75-yard touchdown pass, and a 75-yard touchdown run. Again, that's a sore subject too for some, but he's had some huge plays with
pretty much did it all to those guys in that game, didn't he?
Yeah.
Top receiver. Now this is a little more open-ended. I think we had the conversation a week or two ago. Could Colston Loveland be Michigan's top production guy, regardless of position? I think the world's Tyler Morris. I think Samaj Morgan could have a nice year as well. I'm going to let you answer this one first because I don't even know if I know the answer to this.
I'm going with Tyler Morris, junior wide receiver, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was Colston Loveland. I would not be surprised either if it was Samaj Morgan, who can rack up a lot of yards after the catch. Of course, Tyler Morris can as well if you watch the Rose Bowl, but Samaj Morgan had more yards after the catch last year on average. He's kind of that type of player that catches the ball in space, makes some moves, uses his quickness and agility, and then his speed in the open field. So it could be any of those three, but I'm going to go with Tyler Morris. I think he's going to be that reliable receiver that Michigan needs to have on the outside, regardless of whether or not they have a great tight end. You still need that guy. Michigan had a couple of them last year with Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson, but it's going to be Tyler Morris, I believe. And I said it when we talked about the prospect of Colston Loveland leading the team in receiving. I don't think that is a great indicator of an explosive offense. So also kind of hoping in a way that that it's somebody on the outside. And then Colston Loveland is close and still has a ton of production and a huge role.
I gotta stick with, again, shout out to Scott Bell, who included both of us in his expert roundtable for his newsletter that we both were part of. So I went with Colston Loveland in that. So shout out to Scott. I will stick with that, even though I'm not certain about that at all. But I think the gist of the conversation we had was like, it's not the best thing in the world unless you have a potential unicorn at the position. And we think that they could have that. So we'll see what happens with him. We got two more of these. I want to go to the defensive line. Most sacks on the season.
I got Josiah Stewart, senior edge. I think he's just a great pass rusher. I mean, he's one of the few players in college football that has over 20 sacks on his resume already. In college, we saw him, 5.5 last year, I believe. And it just has more to show. And I think he's going to play more snaps this year. He's going to have the ability to impact games in every single situation. But his bread and butter is getting after the quarterback. And I think we're going to see him do it quite a bit. He could push double digits. But Sharon Moore did say today that they want to rotate heavily on the D line, especially at edge. So other guys will get their chances. Nobody will make the most of their chances better or more than Josiah Stewart.
I'm going with Stewart as well. I think that there's an argument to be made for maybe a Mason Graham, just knowing that Kenneth Grant is going to get a lot of attention too. Again, if they rotate the way we think they do, was it a couple years ago where Mike Morris led the team with like 6.5 sacks? Wasn't a super
I think it was 7.5.
Number.
I think it was 7.5.
Okay. It wasn't a super high number. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something like that happen again. I think there's a lot of draft people who will tell you that they think Mason Graham is the best defensive tackle prospect since Ndamukong Suh, who he was able to rack up a lot of sacks at Nebraska. I mean, he put Colt McCoy in the torture chamber in a Big 12 championship game one year. Not making the direct comparison, but I don't think it's crazy to think that guy can have that type of impact, because typically with defensive tackles, you see them not play their best football until their junior years. So how much higher is the ceiling for him? We'll see. Probably not quite the same type of unicorn athletically, but I'm going to be watching him a lot too. But I will go with Josiah Stewart. We'll end with this one and then get into questions. Most interceptions, Clayton. I went with Zeke Berry because I don't think that teams are going to throw at Will Johnson. I think that would be very unwise to do. Typically, the guy that it's not always like this, but a lot of times the guy that leads your team in picks isn't necessarily the best cover guy. It's just the guy that is getting targeted a lot or making the most of those opportunities. I think very highly of Jair Hill. I think he could be in the mix for this, but I'm going with Zeke Berry. Mikey Sainer still had a knack for making plays there. I think there's a lot of similarities just from a skill set perspective, and I think that he's going to step up in a big way.
The nickel led the team in interceptions last year. You said it. Mikey Sainer still with 6, had the most by a Michigan player since Blake Countess in 2013. So it's not a bad pick. I do think there's going to be a little more rotation there, though, with him and Jade McBurrows, as we talked about earlier, which is kind of scaring me from that pick, but I do like that bold prediction. I'm going with Will Johnson. It might seem too obvious. Maybe teams won't throw at him, but when they do, he's going to have a chance to make a play on the ball every single time. And honorable mention would be Rod Moore. If he was healthy, I would have picked him for this. He's a ball hawk. He's an absolute beast, but unfortunately, he's going to have to impact the team in a different way this year as Coach Rod. And but I'm going to go with Will Johnson.
I love this comment from Aaron Taylor, who says, "Oh, these Big Ten coaches are definitely dumb enough to throw to Will Johnson," which is also true.
Yeah, better quarterbacks now in the league, at least a couple. But these quarterbacks are also bad enough to get in, and part of that too is going to be when you have Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore running after you. You don't know what the hell you're throwing at. You're going to throw it up, and number 2 may come down with